I should probably tell you a few things to make this a little bit more comprehensible. I'm going to be talking in Jackson's own words tonight, and you're going to be experiencing visuals from many different sources. The majority of it is from the monument here, but it has come from other national parks, some universities, and from private collections. So you're going to see a collage of things. Again, most of it from the monument. Okay, let's give this a try. It seems a rather natural thing that I should have become a maker of pictures. My birthplace, the village of Keysville, New York, was set between the picturesque Ausubel Chasm and the wooded Adirondacks. My mother was an accomplished painter in watercolors, and my father was experimenting with the newly discovered process of making daguerreotypes, the forerunner of photography. It was not in studying books which interested me most. I much preferred to draw pictures for the amusement of my classmates. I did not remain in school beyond the 8th grade. From the age of 15, I took my training in the School of Experience. To fulfill my patriotic Civil War duties, I joined the 12th Vermont Infantry and soon was ordered to simply sketch or draw camp life. The assignment gave me almost carte blanche, and I applied myself diligently. I also mapped the surrounding countryside to aid in planning breastworks and trenches. And when my terms of enlistment had expired, I received my discharge and returned to the Green Mountain Land without ever firing a shot. I found ample work in photography and portraiture. Mr. Stiles paid me $25 a week, a royal sum in those days, and I was contented enough. The rosy happiness and promise of prosperity for me, however, were suddenly dispelled. In the spring of 1866, a new turn occurred in my love affair with my fiancée, Miss Catty Eastman. We had a difference so slight, I haven't the remotest idea of its origin. She had spirit, and I was bull-headed, and the quarrel grew. If I possessed the wit of a squirrel, I would have acknowledged my fault and been forgiven. It ate away at me for days, and since I found it impossible in my shame to face the world, I renounced it, pulling up stakes. I found myself in New York City. I chanced to meet an old Civil War friend of mine, Rock. He was a comrade in Company K. He and a friend named Billy were thinking of striking out for the gold mining camps in Montana. The three of us left New York in high spirits. But our hopes were not to be realized, for arriving in Detroit, we soon learned that Billy's expectations of family assistance were a sorry delusion. Through many odd jobs and occasional handouts, we slowly made our way westward to the terminus of the rails. With our plug hats and paper collars and untanned skins, it was not easy finding positions with the bearded, roughly clad wagon bosses. Eventually, Matt Ryan, bound for Virginia City, took us on. His train consisted of 25 double freight wagons with teams of 6 yokes. Staple groceries and liquor made up the greater part of the 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of freight in each wagon. On the first day, you cannot possibly imagine the kind of time we tenderfeet had who had never so much as seen an ox yoked. Many of the bulls were so unmanageable they had to be lariated and pulled up to a wagon wheel to be yoked. It took all day. We faced a repeat the following morning, and every morning after that on the trail. One of the greatest difficulties in cooking is the matter of providing fuel. Wood is scarce, and along most of our route entirely lacking. The only substitute available is buffalo chips, the hard, dry manure of buffalo that is found scattered all over the plains. It makes excellent fire for cooking purposes when entirely dry. But when damp or wet, it is the meanest stuff imaginable to get along with, trying the patience of the cook to the utmost. We had hard times passing around Scotts Bluff. At Ham's Fork, the road divided. I had made up my mind to go to Salt Lake. Bill Mattern joined me in leaving the train, thereby forfeiting all pay due. Eventually, a freighting outfit of a dozen wagons came along, bound for Salt Lake City. It was short 2 drivers, and we took the job at $1 a day. Upon arriving in Salt Lake as a full-fledged bullwhacker, my coat was the same yellow hand-me-down I got back in Detroit. My trousers were so torn and patched, I wore 2 pairs to avoid indecent exposure. My second-hand boots were squashed down without heels, and my hat was recognizable as a head covering only when I had it on. Bill Mattern and I stayed 2 months in Salt Lake City, working on the Birch Farm. In late December, we joined a mule freight outfit going to Los Angeles, and we had intended to go on to San Francisco. However, by the end of March, I had had enough of playing the part of hostler and general roustabout. In fact, I was getting pretty tired of this kind of life, longing to get back to the States. I was soon in Los Angeles again. While waiting for a drive of Mustangs to begin, little jobs kept coming. They knocked the knees out of my trousers and the toes out of my boots. They took pieces out of my hide, and they paid me nothing at all. But the day came when we were ready to take the trail. By the time we reached Omaha, our tired horses, which through losses and trading along the route, had dwindled down to about half the original number. They were a sorry-looking bunch. Sam, the boss, was grouchy as well as tight-fisted, and said the best he could do for me was $20. Well, I felt some dissatisfaction, but I accepted the money and moved on. I got busy at once among the photographers in Omaha. My brother Ed and I took over Hamilton's 2 galleries and added Eaton's studio to our growing enterprise. We were Jackson Brothers photographers. It was no unusual sight to have the reception room filled with groups of blanketed squaws, papooses, and bucks, willing for a small recompense to brave the bad medicine of the camera. I longed to be out on the plains, so a traveling outfit was devised to enable me to take photographs of the outlying scenes. For me, great attractions lay along the railroads. By the summer of 1869, I was photographing the scenery along the length of the Union Pacific from Omaha to Salt Lake City with a companion named Hull. While in Cheyenne, we began doing portraiture at Madame Cleveland's of the ladies who lived there They were pretty solvent, and we needed money to continue. Well, I was much surprised to see Dr. Ferdinand V. Hayden, head of the United States Geological Survey of the Territories, come in to entertain some guests of the survey. He seemed nervous, acting like a cat in a strange garret. During July of 1870, Dr. Hayden dropped off at Omaha, partly for acquaintance sake, but also to obtain some of my photographs. He became enthusiastic with the work I had been doing along the railroad. He pointed out there was a rare opportunity for a photographer traveling with his party to make views of great value. There was just 1 week in which to get ready to join the party at Cheyenne. I was given a crop-eared little mule, Hypo, to carry my working outfit. Hyposulfate is the high-sounding name of a chemical used in wet plate photography. We traversed Wyoming from east to west and back again during the late summer and early fall months. At one camp, we most fortunately discovered the presence of Chief Washakie and his band of Shoshone Indians. Dr. Hayden was anxious to have as many photographs of the band as possible. The doctor decided photography must be one of the regular branches of the survey's operations. I was made its official photographer. Yellowstone became the field of operations for 18. Accompanying us as an honored guest, we had the famous artist Thomas Moran. He entered into the spirit of the work most heartily, dividing his time impartially between his own color sketching and assisting me in selection of camera subjects. We became lifelong friends. The reports of our 71 Yellowstone expedition, together with Moran's art and the photographs that had been widely distributed, played an important role in setting aside this wonderland as our national park. The Pawnees were then living in their ancient earth-covered lodges on the Loup Fork about 100 miles west from Omaha. It was understood they were soon to be removed to another reservation, and then the villages would disappear before the oncoming wave of occupation by settlers. As these were among the last of their kind in the upper Missouri country, and their like would never be seen again, the doctor was very much interested in having them photographed. Tragically, my first wife, Molly, died in childbirth shortly before the 1872 survey season commenced. Focusing on the work of the survey gave me little time to grieve. The southern division of the survey, under James Stevenson, was to explore the Grand Tetons from the west. During the 10 days we were out from the main camp, we had no connection with it except through a messenger sent to renew our supply of flour, bacon, and coffee. We lived in the open, without tents, photographing the magnificent peaks for the first time. Stevenson and Nathaniel Langford, the first superintendent of Yellowstone, decided to ascend the Grand Teton. 26 years later, in 1898, Billy Owen made another ascent, and he spent the rest of his life discrediting the 1872 climb. Nowadays, it's pretty evident that the Langford-Stevenson climb was, in fact, the actual first ascent of the Grand Teton. I had success as well using a larger 11 by 14 inch camera. We moved on to join the main party in Yellowstone The longer exposure times needed in wet plate photography made capturing Old Faithful in a satisfactory way impossible. In '73, I was to command a party to consist of about 8. I was freelance, working over the territory of all the other survey parties. At one point, Potato John, the cook, came back with the distressing information that the mule Gimlet, carrying my boxes of delicate glass negatives, had slipped his pack while going up a big hill, and many of my plates were destroyed. A series of backtracks had to be done to recreate the broken glass negatives. My crowning achievement this season was the photographing of the Mount of the Holy Cross. The approach was a never-ending 2-day bushwhack through fallen timber and boulders. We spent a sleepless, hungry night on Notch Mountain across from the cross, without shelter, waiting out a storm to get the desired photographs the next morning. The results were worth the effort. I've been back several times, but none of those photographs stood up to those earlier images. The 1874 photographic party was to give more attention to the sections having the greatest scenic attractions in the southern reaches of the Colorado Rockies in 1874. At the Los Pinos Agency, the pipe was passed to arrange for photography of the Indians. Shortly thereafter, the chiefs united in declaring it was no bueno. By some conniving, in which we were assisted by the agent's wife, I got a capital negative of Chief Pius Papoose. At once, the chief and 5 or 6 other Indians rode up in front of me, protesting vehemently, pulling away the tripod legs, jerking the focusing cloth from over my head, and throwing a blanket over the camera and myself. They protested that, quote, Indian no sabe picture, make 'em all heap sick, all die, pony die, papoose die, end of quote. Pia made an imperative demand that I give up the plates already made, trying to take the plate box away from me, but this was going too far. Chief Billy belligerently returned. I decided to answer him in the best way he could understand. Motioning to Bob and Steve, the packers, who were crack shots with both rifle and revolver, I got them to put on a little exhibition of target shooting, in which I joined. After about a dozen rounds, Billy departed, and neither he nor Chief Pia tried any further interference with us. With my roving photographic division, we passed down Mancos Canyon below Mesa Verde. The discovery of the first cliff dwelling that came anywhere near our expectations was made unexpectedly. After supper one evening, as we were warming our backs against a generous sagebrush fire, we fell to speculating about the cliff dwellings that had not been seen so far, but which were to be found, John Moss, our guide, said, at the highest part of the canyon, waving his arms to the top of the cliffs. Well, Steve scanned the heights for a few minutes and declared he'd found one of them right up there near the top. Well, it was a great surprise to Moss, who had been joking all along. Everyone was on the jump, and at once we started out to investigate. We documented the first known ruin on Mesa Verde 14 years before the Wetherell's grand discovery of Cliff Palace. In 1875, my ambition ran to something either larger than the 11 by 14 plates, and I finally decided upon a 20 by 24 inch outfit as to the extreme limit of size. Now, when one realizes what this meant, not only packing so large a camera with the necessary 20 by 24-inch glass plates and the chemicals over hazardous mountain trails, but also the difficulties in manipulation of the wet plates magnified many times. It's a wonder to me, even now, that I had the temerity to undertake it. At one point, old Mag, pack mule, lost her balance, falling backwards. She was saved from destruction by lodging against other trees. Well, Bill the packer finally got the lash ropes loosened, the camera carried to where it could be repacked, Maggie on her feet again. It was demure old Mag that always came in for the hardest knocks because of her assignment to photographic work. We were fortunate that the glass plates were securely packed on another mule. We struck south for ancient ruins and a visit to the Hopi Pueblos, exploring along the San Juan River and up the canyon of the Chinle. I was at last rewarded by finding the largest and most important ruin we had seen so far, known today as Poncho House. Riding on rapidly, we were soon among the Moki cornfields. 4 busy days found me visiting the Hopi villages, and what could not be photographed could be sketched. On our return, we passed by the Abajo and La Salle peaks in eastern Utah. A party of Paiute Indians made their presence known by calling down to us in their peculiar, far-reaching cry. We saw a cloud of dust come down the trail, and out of it came some 15 to 20 Indians on ponies, rushing full tilt toward us, shouting their shrill "hi-yi, hi-yi," and swinging their guns over their heads. They did not stop until they had run right into us and, turning about, surrounded us completely. There was nothing to do but sit tight and wait and see. In a spirit of pure mischief and deviltry, they got behind us and with quirt and lariat lashed our horses and mules into a breakneck race. It was a regular stampede to their camp. We were determined to leave and took desperate chances to keep out of the Indians' way. Little did we know that Gardner's survey party was attacked by about 100 Indians just days before in this location. For nearly 2 days, they were under fire behind rock barricades, but finally escaped with the loss of all their camp and instrumental equipment and 4 mules killed. During our plight to escape, old Mag fell backwards on a steep incline. The mule rolled heels over head, making a clear leap of about 40 feet over a perpendicular ledge, landed on her back on top of a scrub cedar. To my utter amazement, she rolled out of the tree, landing right side up on the trail, none the worse for her experience. When we rode into the La Plata camp, preparations were underway to send out a search party for us or our remains. In 1876, I spent nearly the entire season in preparation of the survey's exhibit for the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. This offered an excellent opportunity to show the results of various publications, maps, and other objects of the survey. Photographs, of course, played an important part in the display, and for this, I was awarded a large bronze medal. Instead of going out with the main body of the survey in 1877, I undertook another trip to the Southwest for further investigation of its pueblos and ancient ruins with Reverend Sheldon Jackson, who was about to make a tour among the pueblos along the Rio Grande and as far as the Moki's in Arizona. it was to be a quick trip. If there was to be any photographing, my cumbersome wet plate equipment was entirely out of the question. Well, trial exposures using a dry film were successfully made. It was not until I got back to Washington and began development that I could make sure of the results of this costly experiment. I met with bitter disappointment. No method in developing brought out the faintest trace of any image of any of the exposures. It was quite the most costly setback of my career. There was no going back as I had done in 1873. I considered the whole summer shot to pieces, and the fact that I had compiled a voluminous first report on the Chaco Canyon ruins didn't comfort me much, nor did my sketches of the Rio Grande Pueblos. My feelings were beyond the repair of Dr. Hayden's praise. They still are. I can never replace those lost pictures. Happily, I went out with a survey in 1878 over Wyoming again. Once, as I was riding with Dr. Hayden, we noticed bear tracks crossing our course. They were so recent as to suggest the presence of a large grizzly bear in the immediate neighborhood. We approached within less than 50 yards. I dismounted quickly, my horse bolting at once for the pack train in the rear. Kneeling, I took careful aim with my breech-loading Springfield. At the crack of my rifle, he crumpled up in back of the log as if struck by a bolt of lightning. Well, while taking off the bear's hide, the packers expressed surprise over the fact there was no outward evidence of the bears having been hit at all. It was only when the skull was bared that we discovered that the bullet had penetrated the brain through one of the nostrils without leaving a trace on the surface. After that year, the great surveys of the American West were consolidated for better correlation of the work. I had gone through 9 wonderful seasons with the survey, establishing myself as one of the foremost landscape photographers in the country. My career was assured, and I knew Denver was the place for me. The next dozen years brought me solid material success as a private photographer. Although with a growing family, I always felt hard up. I traveled as much as ever, but with far greater comfort. I secured a job with the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Thereafter, I spent part of every summer on various rails, usually with a private car, all beautifully equipped, including a dark room and a darkie. Sorry, that's one of those bad words I talked about. I traveled to such places as the Pueblos, the Grand Canyon, and California. My pictures for various railroads paid big dividends. Photographs were made in places I had visited previously and of wonders that were new to me. When cold weather set in, I found myself busy in the warmth of the southern states, or Mexico, or the Caribbean, or California. By 1894, my business was in downturn due to the national economy and the evolution of photography. I took a job with the World's Transportation Commission with Major Joseph Pangborn as its leader. I was to receive $5,000 per year as my salary. Well, just days before we were to take sail, Mr. Pangborn told me that I would no longer be paid, but that my expenses would be fully covered. Well, I needed to feed my family, So I found myself scrambling at the last second. Fortunately, Harper's Weekly arranged to use my images. I was happy beyond all possible expression. The tour lasted exactly 17 months. We visited Europe, brushed northern Africa, almost encircled Australia, brushed northern Africa, and parts of Asia. Penetrated deeply into many parts of Asia. We had arranged a Trans-Siberian trip in the fall, and then this smiling official informed us that the trip up the Amur River had been canceled, but we could certainly plan on leaving in the spring after the ice had melted. Or, if we really wished to make an uncomfortable trip, transportation by sled could no doubt be arranged. And it could be arranged much quicker, he told us, a month or two at most, certainly not more than 3 months. We were stuck. We were held up for nearly 2 months, during which time we continued to live luxuriously in the general's mansion. And I accomplished some of the work I had projected for myself with trips to various villages. Finally, the ice on the Amur River was thick enough for us to begin our travel by sled some 3,000 miles to the east. The trip took 25 days of actual day and night travel with temperatures averaging 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Now, so far, I've said almost nothing concerning the real work of the Transportation Commission. The explanation is of elementary simplicity. The World's Transportation Commission did no real work. Our tour became a handsome junket with goodwill as our stock and trade. When we came ashore in New York, our combined capital wouldn't have carried one of us more than 100 miles. The year 1896 was a hard one for me. Business was in a continuing downturn. I was forced to make a change. Begrudgingly, I moved to Detroit, becoming the official photographer and part owner of the Detroit Photographic Company. My 20,000 negatives became company property. The black and white images were transformed into detailed colored lithographs known as photochromes. We produced millions of postcards. Eventually, I gave up being the photographer and became the plant manager. In 1924, the Detroit Publishing Company went into receivership. I survived primarily on my modest Civil War pension. In 1929, I published my first autobiography, The Pioneer Photographer, and accepted a post of research secretary for the Oregon Trail Memorial Association. This job gave me time to travel extensively. Fortunately, the Department of Interior hired me to execute a series of mural paintings of the 4 great surveys of the American West. And if I can just take a brief moment, that painting, I know of at least 12 Jackson photographs that were used to create that particular painting. He was a master at using more than one of his photographs in his paintings. For the National Park Service, I executed some 30 paintings of scenic interest. And from that point forward, I was devoted to creating paintings that depicted the travels along the trails I had traveled as a bullwhacker and vaquero as a young man. I'd always considered myself to be a freehand artist who happened to become a photographer. From my small apartment in New York City, I made annual summer trips westward to visit old familiar scenes. And I attended Civil War memorial events. The wounds of that dark time in American history had long since healed for me. So in this photo, you see Jackson sitting on the left, a veteran from the North, and a veteran from the South, sitting in an airplane, joking with each other. Who knows what they were saying? I would have loved to have heard this conversation right here. I reached the age of 99, I think, for two principal reasons. The first is I inherited a tough constitution. My mother had reached the age of 91. The second reason is that I never took time out enough to get run down. There had always been so much to do tomorrow that I had never ever relaxed to any extent. And incidentally, I also believe that cold baths stiffen my resolve. It's been very pleasant, this business of growing old. Of one thing I'm sure, no one ever reached the 90s by simply following a set of rules. In living, as in art, rules are drawn from practice, not the other way around.